Turn with me to Matthew chapter 24, verses 4 through 8. That's where we will be tonight. The title of this message is called The Signs of the Times? Question mark? Notice my inflection went up a little bit. Sign of the Times? Question mark? Let's read verses 4 through 8, and that's all we'll read tonight and talk about it. And Jesus answered them, "See that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ. And they will lead many astray, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains." Now, last week we discussed Jesus' statement that the temple was going to be left desolate and his foretelling that the temple would be destroyed. This caused massive concern on the part of the disciples, and they wanted to know when these things would happen. We also discussed at some length the fact that they believed that if the temple was destroyed, it was the end of the world. They had an idea that the temple was supposed to be forever. And that if the temple got destroyed, it was the end of the world. And so they wanted to know, Jesus, when is the temple going to get destroyed and when is the end of the world? To them, there was no difference in those two things. But as we saw last week, and what we must understand in order to interpret Matthew 24 correctly, is that Jesus takes their question and separates it into two questions. The first question being this: when will the temple be destroyed? That's the first question. So Jesus takes their question, splits it into two. The first one is, when will the temple be destroyed? The second question is, when will be the second coming? So when is the second coming of Christ, and when is the temple destroyed? That's what Jesus is answering. He has taken it and split the one question into two questions, correcting their theology and their interpretation, as we saw last week, of many Old Testament texts. Remember, everything before verse 35, Matthew 24, 4 through 35, all of that is answering the first question: when will the temple fall? 36 through 51 is answering the question: when is the second coming? If you start mixing those two together, Matthew 24 becomes a jumbled mess that is impossible to understand. If you start mixing the two together, then you're going to have all kinds of wrong views about not only the destruction of the temple, but also the second coming. In our text tonight, which many people call the signs of the times, that's why I titled it The Signs of the Times, Jesus' main point is that these things that we just read are not signs of the impending destruction of Jerusalem and its temple, nor are they signs of Christ's second coming. So, 4 through 8, what we just read, false Christ, wars and rumors of wars, kingdom against kingdom, nation against nation, famines and earthquakes, are not signs of anything. They're not signs of anything. As we walk through this, I hope you will come to understand why that is the case. Sam Storm says, they serve no purpose at all in telling us when the temple will be destroyed, nor are they, as many believe today, signs telling us that the second coming of Christ is imminent. In fact, as we will see, these are simply a part of the natural order of things that occur in every generation. Jesus is expressly teaching that these are not signs. And what has the tradition that probably most of us have grown up under is that these are signs. It is the very opposite of what Jesus is actually teaching. He's saying these are not signs. This is not what these wars and rumors of wars and this kingdom against kingdom and nation against nation and false Christ and earthquakes and disasters, these things are not going to help you know at all when the temple's going to fall. These are things that are going to happen from the time Jesus says it until the time the temple falls. These are things that are just going to happen. And as we're going to conclude tonight, these are things that are going to happen all in our lifetime too. Every generation is going to experience these things, and they are not helpful to help us understand at all when certain eschatological things will happen. Listen to the words of R.T. France in his commentary on the book of Matthew. He says this: "It is remarkable how often occurrences such as those mentioned in the verses are appealed to by those who are trying to work out a pattern for eschatological events, whereas in fact they are mentioned here precisely in order to discourage such speculation and to assert that these events described are not part of an eschatological scenario, but rather routine events within world history, which must not be given more weight than they deserve. Each generation has its share of political and natural disasters, and each is tempted to think that its own experiences are somehow worse and of more ultimate significance than the sufferings of other generations. But this is not the end." Now let me remind you, Jesus is directly, verses 4 through 8, is about the temple. Okay, now it's going to have some application that we're going to see at the end, but Jesus is telling the disciples when the temple's going to fall. So this is in direct context of the temple falling. And we established last week, all right, all about the temple, and that these first 35 verses are all about the temple falling. When we see the phrase, "the end is not yet," Jesus is not talking about the end of the world. He's talking about the end of the temple. So when Jesus says all these things are going to happen, but the end is not yet, he's not saying the end of the world's not yet. He's saying the end of the temple is not yet. So these things are going to happen in your lifetime, disciples. You're going to have false Christ. You're going to have wars, rumors of wars. You're going to have nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom. You're going to have earthquakes. You're going to have famines. But none of these things are signs that the temple is going to fall. These are just things that are going to happen all through the period from really 33 AD to 70 AD when the temple fell. These are just things that are going to occur. Don't be led astray. Don't be alarmed. These things have to happen. It's the way things are. So, the list of false alarms, as I am calling them, that we will discuss in just a minute, are things that are going to happen from 33 to 70 AD, since they are routine events in every generation. So let's take a look at these false alarms, and I want to make you aware of the historical contents that these have in the years of 33 to 70 AD. So what I'm attempting to do tonight is I'm going to walk through 4 false alarms that are mentioned in our text, and I'm going to show you how all of these things have, the disciples saw all of them between 33 and 70 AD. So everything Jesus says you're going to hear about, you're going to see, you're going to experience, they actually experienced all of it before 70 AD. Not as signs, but as routine events that happen in every generation. First false alarm is messianic pretenders. It says in verse 4, "And Jesus answered them, 'See that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray.'" Now, when we read that there are those who will come in Jesus' name saying, "I am the Christ," we should not think of those who are claiming to be Jesus returning at the end of the world. See, here's what we're so quick to do. All right? We're so quick to read something and immediately say, "What does this mean for me?" Here's the problem with doing that, is that what Jesus is saying, he's saying to the disciples. That is the audience he's speaking to. And if you were here when we did our series about 2.5 years ago on biblical interpretation, the very first principle of biblical interpretation is to answer the question, what did it mean to the original audience? If you don't answer that question, then you're going to mess everything up. And this is one of the things that we've done. We've taken this false Christ thing and we've grabbed a hold of it, and instead of asking what would that have meant for the disciples, we shoot it to the end of the world. As if Jesus is saying, don't be led astray. Many are people they're going to come and they're going to claim that they are me and it's the second coming. That's not what Jesus said. It is better to understand this at this declaration of I am the Christ that people are going to say as a claiming to be the messianic liberator presenting themselves to the Jewish people for the first time. Now remember, what were the Jews looking for in the Messiah? Were they looking for a suffering servant?
No.
Not at all. That is ultimately why they rejected Jesus. They were looking for a liberator. One who would come, who would say, I am your Messiah, follow me, I'm going to get you out from underneath Rome. A warrior. By the way, Jesus is a warrior, and that will be his second advent when he comes back. He will be the messianic liberator physically. They were looking for it the first time. That's why they rejected Jesus. He did not fit the category they thought the Messiah was going to be. So when we read that people are going to come and say, I am the Christ, don't think end of the world. Think there are going to be people that are arising that are going to claim to be the Messiah. The one who's going to come and liberate you. Don't be led astray. Do not be led astray. And then he says, even though many will. These false messiahs, these false prophets and teachers are going to pop up, and many people are going to be led astray, thinking this one's the Messiah. This is the one who's going to get us out from under the thumb of Rome. This is the one that's going to liberate us. Jesus saying, don't be led astray. Do not be led astray. When Jesus says that many will come in my name, he does not mean that they will claim to be Jesus. In other words, he's not saying people are going to come and they're going to tell you that they're me. No, he's not saying they're going to come and claim to be the person Yeshua. What he means by come in my name is they will claim his role and title, which properly belongs to Jesus. So what they're going to do is they're going to come and they're going to say, I'm the Messiah, I'm the liberator, I'm the one you've been waiting for. The problem is those titles belong to Jesus. So when it says that they're going to come in my name, it means they're going to come claiming for themselves only what I am. Right. Don't be led astray by them, even though many people will be. During the life of the disciples, there was no shortage of people who claimed this very thing. We see a few of them in Scripture itself, namely in the book of Acts. Acts chapter 5, verse 36 tells us of a man named Thaddeus who led a number of people. Josephus says 400. Josephus, by the way, was a Roman historian that wrote on Jewish history for the Romans. Okay, so Josephus writes that 400 people followed this man. Then we're told in Acts 5, oh, by the way, this man was eventually killed, and what happened to his followers? They all dispersed. In Acts 5:37, the very next verse tells us of a man named Judas the Galilean who rose up during the census and led many astray, but he too was killed and his followers dispersed. Acts 21:38 speaks of an Egyptian that stirred up 4,000 men to revolt against Rome to liberate the Jewish people. Now, how do you get 4,000 people to say, we'll follow you to be liberated from Rome? You claim to be the Christ. Come, follow me. I'll be your leader. I will liberate you. And these zealots follow this Egyptian man to liberate the Jewish people. Josephus, by the way, he wrote during the time of Nero, AD 37 to AD 66. He says there were deceivers and false prophets that were arrested on a daily basis. Let that sink in for a minute. That Rome was arresting false prophets, false Christ, false messiahs every single day, according to Roman history. Eusebius, a Roman historian, also wrote that there were false messiahs during this period. Now, this should not surprise us, given that the zealots existed during this time period. By the way, one of the disciples was a former zealot. These were a group of military Jews who wanted to overthrow Rome and would have been prime candidates for false messiahs. They're looking for a leader to come help them set the Jews free out from Rome. So they were prime candidates for a false messiah to step forward and say, I'll lead you. Follow me. I'm the one you've been waiting for. Messianic pretenders, those coming in Christ's name, claiming to be the Messiah for the first time, not the second coming of Jesus. That makes sense? The second false alarm, military conflict. Jesus then says they will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Leon Morris, in his commentary on the book of Matthew, makes an interesting point. He says the disciples would not be caught up in these wars because they will hear about the wars and the rumors of wars. They will not be a part of the wars themselves. This would naturally be linked to messianic pretenders because they would be military in nature, because that is what the Jews were looking for in this first coming of the Messiah, one who would liberate them. So it would make sense that if you have a bunch of false Christs popping up, gathering support from people, and all these people are thinking we're going to militarily get out from underneath Rome, then guess what you're going to hear a whole lot of? Wars and rumors of wars. It's going to go on like crazy during the time period of the disciples' life. The period from 33 to 70 AD was littered with military conflict all over the known world, by the way. An uprising in Caesarea took 20,000 Jewish lives. Another uprising at I always mispronounce this, Scythopolis, 13,000 Jews were killed. In Alexandria, 50,000 were slain. 10,000 more were killed in Damascus. The Roman historian Tacitus recorded events from 14 AD to AD 14 to AD 68. He mentions wars in Parthia, which is northeastern Iran, disturbances in Germany, commotions in Africa and Thrace, which is Greece, Turkey, and Bulgaria, insurrections in Gaul, and a war in Britain and Armenia. Wars and rumors of wars are probably pointed to more than anything else to say the end is near. Jesus is about to come back. It's probably the thing pointed to in our day more than any other thing else, right? That's the thing. All of a sudden wars break out, and what do? Oh, wars and rumors of wars. Look out, Jesus could be coming back. My goodness, in the time of the disciples, they were hearing about wars and rumors of wars all the time. All over the known world, there were conflicts breaking out everywhere. It's understandable that we would think that, but it's the opposite of what Jesus is saying. Jesus says, do not be alarmed. These things must take place, but the end is not yet. In other words, you're going to hear about all these wars all the time, disciples. You're going to hear about wars and rumors of wars. You are going to constantly hear about them in your lifetime. And none of these wars and rumors of wars are going to mean that the temple's going to fall. Or that this is it. The end is not yet. So wars and rumors of wars don't mean the end is coming. It just means there's wars and rumors of wars. That's what happens. We'll talk in a minute about why that happens. Jesus is saying there will be wars and rumors of wars everywhere, but this is not a sign that the temple is about to be destroyed. I mean, can you imagine if they did that? Given the fact that I just read you about 10 to 12 different military conflicts, and that is not an exhaustive list. I just read you 10 to 12 military conflicts. Can you imagine if the disciples were trying to look for wars and rumors of wars as being a sign? Which one could they point to? Oh, this one's it. No, okay. Oh, this one's it. No, oh, this one's it. Jesus saying, the point of saying this is to say, don't do that. Don't think every time a war pops up or you hear about a war that you run thinking, okay, this is it, temple's going to fall, temple's going to fall. Jesus is saying, no, don't do that. It's the opposite of what I want you to do. You just keep doing what I'm calling you to do, which by the way, next week, verses 9 through 14, we will see what they have been called to do. Third false alarm, political turmoil. The basis of wars and rumors of wars is probably found in the next phrase. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. This phrase is reminiscent of Isaiah 19:2, where the Lord is talking about reoccurring events by symbolically discussing Egypt. And it says this, and I will stir up Egyptians against Egyptians, and they will fight each against one another and each against his neighbor, city against city, kingdom against kingdom. The point of the Isaiah 19 passage is reinforcing the points that these are things that happen throughout history. Brother rises up against brother. City rises up against city. Nation rises up against nation. There's always going to be political upheaval. That's the way that we are. We all know well enough that those who are politically minded are always in turmoil, trying to gain power or trying not to lose power. Right. Isn't that the nature of politics?
Right, all day long.
And Jesus is saying, listen, this is going to happen all in your lifetime. And when there is political upheaval, don't stop and think, is this the one that's going to tell us? Is this the one that's going to tell us? How exhausting. And by the way, how distracting from the purpose and the focus that the disciples should have. Jesus is going to give them a few clear signs as we work through this text. There are going to be some clear things that Jesus says, when this happens, you will know the temple's going to fall. All of these things is Jesus saying, these things are all going to happen, and they're not a sign the temple's going to fall. I'm going to let you know when the temple's going to fall. It's not these things. Fourth, natural disasters. In addition to political turmoil, there will be natural turmoil. This is another massive element that people point to in order to say that Jesus is coming back soon. But natural disasters are normal and have always been massively impactful. N.T. Wright lays out the extensive natural disasters that occurred during this time period of AD 33 to AD 70 in his book, The New Testament and the People of God. He states that the historical records that we have of these days mention earthquakes in Asia Minor in AD 61, Italy in AD 62, Jerusalem in AD 67, earthquakes in Palestine, Crete, Smyrna, Chios, Samos, Campania, and Rome. The cities of Laodicea, Hierapolis, and Colossae were severely damaged by an earthquake in AD 60. Jesus mentions famines as well. The famine described in Acts 11:28 occurred in AD 44. It resulted in the disciples at Antioch creating an offering to be sent to help the people out who were suffering in the famine. 3 other famines occurred during the reign of Claudius. Tacitus mentions the frequencies of famines in this period. And by the way, this is all before technology to help us record the small ones. All of these are the big ones that everybody feels. What happens today is we have so much more. We know more about earthquakes. So, there's an earthquake here, there's an earthquake there, there's an earthquake here, there's an earthquake there. Because our technology lets us know all of these things. Haven't we had like a few 3.5, 4.0 earthquakes like here in the Metroplex? I haven't felt one of them. Irving, but I know other people in Wiley felt them. They get on Twitter. Y'all feel that earthquake? And I'm like, no. Again, if all of these things occurred from AD 33 to AD 70, what were the disciples supposed to do? Which earthquake? They're going to be like, with this earthquake. No, that earthquake. No. Think of the distraction that would occur. Now Jesus is giving them 4 things. 4 things. There's going to be false Christ. Well, which false Christ which one is supposed to be the main sign? There's going to be wars and rumors of wars. Well, which war? Which rumor? Well, you're going to have political upheaval. Well, which one? You're going to have natural disasters. Well, which one? Can you imagine the massive distraction from the Great Commission that this would be? That's what we talked about all last week, right? Was the commission of Jesus and his people. What a distraction it would be if the disciples sat around and tried to figure out all of these signs, these random things that who in the world could pick anything out? Jesus was saying these are routine events that occur in history, in every generation. Jesus then says at the end of this, all of these are but the beginning of the birth pains. This phrase is a common phrase in Scripture. It can mean different things. Most of the time, it refers to a specific period of judgment that was coming. Which would make sense here, considering that Jerusalem and the temple were under God's judgment. So it seems from context that this political and natural upheaval were in relation to the judgment that was coming on Israel and the temple, but they were not signs indicating when this would come. Sam Storms states, none of these birth pains were meant at any time to mislead Christians into thinking that either Christ's second coming was imminent or that God's judgment was about to begin. Birth pains itself means simply not yet, especially combined with beginning. Here's what we do. We take the analogy of birth pains and we stretch it too far. So what we do is we say, oh, well, birth pains, well, that means they're going to get really, really bad right before the baby comes. But you look at most of the time how this phrase is used in the Old Testament, that's not what it means. It simply means not yet. In other words, is the baby here? Not yet. We still have birth pains. It's not little birth pains and then it's going to grow into a bunch of big birth pains and that's how we'll know. It simply means not yet. And then Jesus throws in on the beginning of it to really let you know, not even close to being yet. So all of these things that Jesus mentions, he then ends by saying, these things are just birth pains. The destruction of the temple is not yet. So when these things happen, do not think that this means these are signs that this is going to occur. Jesus is telling them that when you see these things that I just told you about, don't think they're going to help you pinpoint when Jerusalem and the temple will fall. What many in our day do is we miss the main point about that. First of all, we miss the main point that Jesus is talking about the temple. That's the first point we miss. The second point we miss is we remove these verses out of context. We import them to the end of the world, and we miss what Jesus is actually saying in regards to the events. And we think they are signs when Jesus is pointing out that we should never think that they're signs. So it's really a twofold mistake. We mistake the context. It's the temple, not the end of the world. And we mistake the intended meaning of Jesus. So we miss what he's talking about, and we miss why he's saying it. As a result, over the last 100 years, every time there is a war, the second coming is here. By the way, all you have to do is look back at American history. World War I, it's the end of the world. World War II, it's the end of the world. The original Gulf War, oh, now we got a war in the Middle East we're involved in. End of the world. Guess what occurs every single time? Not the end of the world. Every time there's a political shift on a global scale, the second coming is close. And of course, when they don't happen, we simply move down the timeline and start guessing all over again. So we see what's happening, we guess that this is it, then when it doesn't happen, we just move to the next event and guess again, and move to the next event and guess again. And the point that Jesus is making is, I don't want you to do that. Don't be led astray by this. Stay focused on what you're supposed to do. And I'll just give you a hint. What Jesus is going to tell them is, you're going to die for me. You're going to die. Stay focused on your mission, which will end in your death. Don't get caught up in wars and rumors of wars and political upheaval as if that's a sign. It's not. You stay focused on what you're supposed to do. Now, one of the reasons why we are so prone to misinterpret verses and misapply things is that we have a tough time seeing beyond our own little space and time. That's our biggest issue. When it comes to eschatology and the end of the world things, we have a very hard time seeing outside of our little space in the timeline. We have a very myopic, nearsighted view of history. So we tend to think that the situation is worse now. That things are bad, really, really bad now. We need to understand that history is full of false Christ, wars and rumors of wars, political upheaval, and natural disasters, and they never tell us anything in regards to when Jesus is coming back. So why do these things happen? The answer is very simple. We live in a fallen world where sin rules the hearts of people. And as a result of sin, the earth is cursed. Why would we not have natural disasters and wars and rumors of wars and false Christ and kingdom against kingdom and nation against? Why would we not have these things? Isn't that what sin and the curse brought?
Yep.
It's a very routine thing to have sinners acting like sinners on a small scale or a big scale. All we have to do is look at American history to see this. We don't even have to step back and look at the whole world to see this as true. All we got to do is look at American history. I've already mentioned it a little bit. We have been involved in over 50 military conflicts since our land became a nation. We've had false prophets in Christ. We've had natural disaster after natural disaster, killing millions of people. And every time there is an election in this country, we go into political upheaval. Do we not? All we have to do is look at America. 50 military conflicts, natural disaster after natural disaster after natural disaster, political upheaval, false prophets, false Christ, false teachers and leaders. We have this just in our country since its inception. We also like to think that this country is getting spiritually worse. I am not of that opinion, by the way. Say, what? We have to be spiritually worse. How can we not be spiritually worse now than we've ever been? Again, I think when we say that, we're looking too narrowly. We need to back up, get a broader view. Get a broader view. Vodi Bakum, a Baptist pastor from Spring, Texas, who is also a writer and conference speaker, he did an interesting look at the 1950s, when many people think that everything was better than it was today. He was preaching through the book of Revelation. He was addressing the church at Sardis, where Jesus says these words, "I know your works. You have the reputation of being alive, but you're dead. So on the outside, Sardis, you look like you're doing it. You look like you're doing the works you're supposed to be doing. You look like you're spiritually alive. You look like you're doing it, Sardis, but you're dead. You're not doing it. You're not spiritually alive." Vodi Bakum then, as a means of illustration, compares this statement to the 1950s in America. History has made the 50s look like a time when everything was wholesome and respectable, and people did what they were supposed to do. But Vodi Bakum gives a list of things that were a part of the 50s and that were a disgrace to that decade and to humanity. The most obvious of all would be the very public racism that was displayed. In this day that many people call the good old days, blacks were not allowed to drink from the same water fountain as whites, use the same restroom as whites, go to the same schools, or sit in the same section of a movie theater. Vodi Bakum, who is a black man, ends his discussion by saying, "You can keep your 50s. Now, I understand why many people look at the 50s and say the 50s were better than today. Here's the thing. If you view it from a myopic view, namely white middle-class American view, it is better. Ask a white man and a black man about the 50s, and you'll get two differing opinions about the 50s.
Right.
You see the temptation, though? See, the temptation is to zoom in on only what our experience is.
Right.
And to think that our experience is the whole. Now, take that and branch it out even further. We say, America. Well, let's get past America and look at the world. And you say, okay, the world. But now let's branch out farther than just the world. And let's say every century, every generation of the world. Guess what we find? No matter where we look, no matter what time in history you plop yourself down in, guess what we see? False Christ, wars and rumors of wars, kingdom against kingdom, nation against nation, and we see political upheaval, natural disasters. No matter where you drop down, that's what you're going to see.
Same thing.
The same thing everywhere. C.S. Lewis, no surprise, one of my favorite authors. He said that we are tempted to look at a certain era and think they are better or worse than another generation. He pointed to the cleanliness and respectfulness of the Victorian era. And he said many think that they are not as wicked as other generations. He states that every generation is the same in their wickedness. One may just be dressed better.
Yeah, right.
This is biblically true, by the way. The reason why every generation within a country and why every country throughout history is evil is because the heart of man is evil. You can dress it up in a Victorian outfit, put a suit and tie on it, but if Jesus is not the king of the person's heart, then it is wicked, and you will have wars and rumors of wars, you have political upheaval, you will have false Christ.
Right.
And because of sin, the earth is cursed, and you will have natural disasters.
Right. So right.
Jesus. And by the way, this is how we get sidetracked, Christians in America. We get sidetracked in trying to decipher wars and things that Jesus said aren't signs. We're now trying to decipher them as if they're signs, and all we're doing is getting massively sidetracked from what we're supposed to be doing, which is exactly what Jesus, next week, as he tells them, here's what's going to happen to you, he doesn't want them to get sidetracked from, here's what's going to happen to you. Don't go running after wars and rumors of wars and political upheavals and natural disasters and false Christ. Don't go chasing all this as if this is a sign. You do what I've commissioned you to do. It's going to end in your death, but it's going to be for my glory and for your good. You got to get zeroed in, focused on your mission. So don't get sidetracked by these false alarms as if they are going to tell you when the destruction of the temple is going to be. And I would just say, church, don't get sidetracked by the false alarms. We have a commission to be a part of.
Right.
We got a commission that we're supposed to be zoomed in and focused in on. Because of the wickedness of man's heart, this is why false alarms are not signs of the second coming of Christ. Because as long as men are sinful and the earth is cursed, then we will experience these things. Jesus was making the same point in our text tonight. Disciples, these are not signs. Don't be alarmed. Don't be led astray. Be about your commission.